This material explores the geopolitical dynamics of the Russia-Ukraine war, shifting from the history of the conflict and the transition to drone warfare to theories about a U.S.-Russia global realignment and finally detailing Israel's strategic neutrality due to Russian presence in Syria.
Yeah, it really covers an enormous amount of ground.
It does. And, it shows a deeply impressive grasp of international relations. So our goal for this critique is to maximize its analytical impact by looking at it through the lenses of structure and flow and completeness and focus.
Right. Let's get straight into it.
Yeah, let's do it. Because the scope of the author's work here is, it's monumentally ambitious. I mean, we are moving from dirt-level tactical warfare.
Right, like the actual shell counts.
Exactly. Analyzing shell counts, armor maneuvers, and then zooming all the way up to high-level global diplomacy. So a key theme running through this material seems to be the stark contrast between these two worlds.
Yeah, the contrast is huge.
Right? Specifically, the highly verifiable military details on one hand, and then these sweeping political claims on the other, regarding a potential global realignment spearheaded by the U.S. and Russia.
Well, the transition between the factual military analysis and the grand geopolitical theory disrupts the piece's overall credibility.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's jarring.
It really is. I mean, the weakness here is that it's just this abrupt, unannounced shift in epistemology, because the author meticulously breaks down these empirically verifiable battlefield realities.
Like the destruction of the armored columns at the Kyiv airport.
Exactly, yeah. And the tactical shift to Iranian-style drone warfare. But then, without any warning, the text just pivots to highly speculative, controversial claims about a secret Trump-Putin-China world order.
Right, and they present both with the exact same level of absolute certainty.
Yes, that is the critical flaw. Treating established facts and speculative theory as if they have the exact same evidentiary weight. It jars the reader.
It causes severe whiplash because, the author spends the first third of the material earning immense credibility, right? Analyzing the 2022 invasion, detailing the massive intelligence failure on Russia's part.
Missing the fact that NATO had spent 8 years helping build a million-strong Ukrainian army.
Yeah, exactly. And that is rigorous, bulletproof military analysis. Reading it feels like consuming a gritty historical war documentary. But then halfway through, it suddenly turns into a sci-fi political thriller.
Yeah, the tone completely shifts.
Right. They start talking about this secret Alaska meeting where global spheres of influence were carved up. And my question is, if we suggest softening the language around those geopolitical claims, do we risk neutering that bold, authoritative voice?
I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah.
Because it feels like we might be telling them to, second-guess themselves on the page.
How do we keep the author's bold voice without losing the audience's trust? Well, the suggestion here is to introduce a clear, structural framing device that explicitly separates the established historical events from the forward-looking, speculative geopolitical analysis, and to adjust the level of certainty in the language accordingly.
Okay, yeah. So we aren't telling them to drop the theory.
No, definitely not. Calibrating the tone isn't about diluting the voice, right? It's about earning the reader's trust so the bold voice actually lands. Because when an author presents a speculative theory as an undeniable historical fact, a savvy reader immediately puts their guard up.
Oh, absolutely. They start thinking, wait, is this whole thing a conspiracy theory?
Exactly. The rigorous military analysis starts to feel like a manipulative setup. So as an example, the simplest execution is inserting a definitive transitional bridge.
Like a signpost in the text.
Yet, a dedicated paragraph that just acts as an explicit signpost. Something along the lines of, moving from the established realities of the battlefield to the more opaque world of backroom diplomacy, we must examine the prevailing strategic theories regarding whatever.
Oh, I like that. The opaque world of backroom diplomacy?
Right, because it immediately signals to the reader's brain that we are shifting gears. It tells them I, the author, recognize that we're moving from hard data to analytical interpretation, and that self-awareness protects their objectivity.
Yeah, a signpost works really well for a smooth glide. But what if they wanted to go bolder with it?
How do you mean?
Like structurally dividing the material into two distinct acts. They could literally title the first half The Ground War. Focusing strictly on the 2014 to 2022 timeline, the intelligence failures, the Shahed drones.
Oh, And then a physical break on the page.
Exactly. A hard page break, and then open Act 2, the global chessboard, focusing on the speculative motives of the US, China, and Europe.
I actually love that. A structural division like that is a brilliant way to reset the reader's analytical lens. That physical line break gives the audience permission to change how they consume the information.
Right. They finish the history lesson, take a breath, and then buckle in for the theory.
Exactly. And if they do use qualifying language for the geopolitical segment, presenting the Trump-Putin alignment as, say, prevailing strategic theory rather than an undisputed fact.
That retains the gravity of the claim, but shifts the burden of proof.
Spot on. The author is no longer saying, I can categorically prove this secret meeting happened, but rather, this is the working theory that explains the seemingly irrational behavior we are seeing.
And honestly, that nuance is what separates a pundit from a true strategic analyst.
Yeah, for sure. So, building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the audience's immediate entry point to the story?
Oh, you mean the opening sequence?
Exactly.
Because right now the material opens with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the formation of the 15 independent states. It's a very macro-level history lesson.
Yeah, it takes this sprawling, orbital view of Eastern Europe before it eventually zooms in.
And honestly, it takes far too long to get to the most fascinating insight in the entire document, which is Israel's position.
Yes, exactly. The fascinating explanation of Israel's strategic neutrality is buried too late in the narrative, diminishing its impact as a primary narrative hook.
It's totally...
The weakness here is that this deeply engaging, locally relevant angle, the tacit quid pro quo between Israel and Russia regarding Syrian airspace, Iranian targets, and the refusal to supply tie-breaking weapons to Ukraine, it is just tacked on to the very end of a sprawling global overview.
Which makes the most original insight feel like an afterthought, right? Rather than the central anchor of the piece.
Exactly. And it really is the crown jewel of the analysis.
It is. The way the author explains how Israel is navigating this impossible tightrope is fascinating. Because the Russian military maintains bases in Khmeimim and Tartus in Syria, Russia effectively controls the airspace just north of Israel.
Right. And Israel needs to constantly strike Iranian weapons shipments in Syria.
Yes, which requires Russian cooperation, or at least a promise that Russian anti-air systems won't shoot down Israeli jets. And in exchange for that freedom, Israel refuses to supply what the author calls tie-breaking weapons, like the Iron Dome, to Ukraine.
It's a perfect illustration of the cascading effects of a proxy war. It explains exactly why a staunch Western ally is refusing to arm a besieged European democracy.
So how do we fix the pacing?
The suggestion is to invert the macro to micro structure entirely. Use the Israel-Ukraine diplomatic tension as the primary opening hook and work backward to explain the global dynamics that force this local reality.
I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen, because I agree it's a phenomenal hook, but if we pull the Israel section to the absolute front of the paper, do we run the risk of false advertising?
False advertising?
Yeah, like a reader clicks on a Russia-Ukraine analysis, and they might feel confused if the first 3 pages are focused heavily on Jerusalem and Damascus. How does the author pivot from the Middle East back to Kyiv without causing narrative whiplash?
Oh, I see. You prevent that by grounding the opening in a highly specific, tense anecdote that physically connects the two nations.
Okay, what kind of anecdote?
Well, buried in the text, the author mentions a diplomatic spat over stolen wheat.
Oh, right, the stolen wheat incident.
Yeah, and they note that President Zelensky intentionally bypassed Israel on his Middle East tour, so make that the opening scene.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right? Put the reader in the room during that diplomatic snub. Open the piece with that stolen wheat spat and use that tension to ask the central question: why is Israel refusing to arm a Western ally?
Opening with the stolen wheat incident creates immediate suspense. It shifts the piece from a dry, historical lecture into like an active investigation of hidden diplomatic mechanics.
It forces the reader to lean in. They want to decode the mystery.
And from that opening anecdote, the entire rest of the piece simply becomes the answer to that compelling mystery.
Exactly. Another concrete example of how to do this is to weave the concept of Israel's restraint throughout the entire piece as a reoccurring case study.
So instead of isolating it, you just keep coming back to it?
Yeah. Use it to show how smaller regional powers are forced to navigate the chaos of the US-Russia proxy war. Every time the author introduces a macro shift in US or European policy, check back in on how that shift applies pressure to Jerusalem.
I love that. Or what if they started immediately with the image of the Russian base in Khmeimim, Syria?
Oh, establishing the physical proximity right away.
Exactly. Use that geographic claustrophobia. Show how close the anti-air batteries are to Israeli airspace in the very first paragraph. That physical proximity becomes the driving force behind all the geopolitical decisions mentioned later in the piece.
That is a phenomenal visual hook. It makes the abstract concept of a global proxy war immediately tangible.
Because when you realize a Russian missile battery is a 5-minute flight from your northern border, neutrality suddenly makes a lot of sense.
Right, the survival instinct kicks in.
Exactly. Now, if the author adopts this inverted structure, the narrative is going to be driven heavily by complex hidden motivations, like Israel's secret Syrian calculus.
Yes.
And because of that, I think the other major actors in the piece need that exact same level of three-dimensional treatment. Let's look at the section discussing Europe's role in the conflict.
Yeah, that section currently feels somewhat flat. The portrayal of Europe's motivations lacks analytical nuance, painting a complex and fractured alliance with a single, overly broad brushstroke.
Europe acting as a monolith.
Exactly. The weakness is that the material claims Europe is forcing Ukraine to fight purely to collapse Russia. It presents this as a cynical, continent-wide conspiracy, which ignores the vast internal divisions within the continent.
And it totally dismisses the genuine existential defensive fears of Eastern European nations, which really weakens the objectivity of the broader geopolitical thesis.
Yeah. Treating Europe as a single mastermind in this context is, well, it just doesn't reflect reality.
It's like treating a massive homeowners association as a single rational mind.
Exactly.
Think about it. The house sitting right next to the raging forest fire, the Baltic states, they are screaming for a massive, expensive sprinkler system because they are legitimately afraid of burning down.
Right, they have historical precedent to be terrified.
Yes. Meanwhile, the house 3 blocks away, Western Europe, is complaining about the cost of the water bill and looking for a diplomatic compromise with the fire. You cannot write a credible geopolitical analysis without acknowledging that internal friction.
That is such a good analogy. And when an author paints a picture of international relations without acknowledging that friction, the savvy reader immediately spots the oversimplification.
They just stop trusting the analysis.
They do. So the suggestion here is to introduce the internal European divide and acknowledge the agency of local actors to preempt obvious counterarguments and strengthen the analytical depth.
So practically, how do they do that without getting bogged down?
This briefly contrasts the motivations within Europe, differentiate the existential panic of the Baltic states, who legitimately fear being the next targets of a Russian invasion, from the economic and political anxieties of Western Europe.
Just spending a paragraph on that contrast acts as a pressure valve for the reader's skepticism.
Exactly. It signals, I see the nuance, I acknowledge the complexity, which buys the author the analytical currency to return to their macro thesis about the proxy war strategy.
Now, what about the portrayal of Ukraine itself? Because right now, the piece borders on suggesting the Ukrainian military is only fighting because Brussels or Washington is forcing them to.
Yeah, it strips them of their free will. Another concrete example for improvement is to explicitly acknowledge the agency of the Ukrainian people.
Clarify that while Western support and NATO training enable the war, the local resistance is also driven by a desire for survival, not just European proxy manipulation.
Exactly. The author can maintain their argument about Western logistics being the mechanical force continuing the war. That's highly defensible, but they must clarify the survival aspect.
Right, because recognizing Ukrainian agency doesn't negate the proxy war. It just makes it a more accurate reflection of the messy reality on the ground.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on Europe as a monolithic puppet master might overlook the messy, chaotic reality of NATO's internal politics?
Oh, completely. I am amazed that somehow I can talk about something like this for 1 hour, and we do not start disagreeing until about 20 minutes in.
I know. I'm amazed that you don't start disagreeing with me until about 20 minutes in. I mean, the author themselves hints at this chaos when mentioning Europe's rebellion against U.S. and Trump policy, pulling that thread further, showing that NATO is often reacting frantically rather than flawlessly orchestrating things, makes for a much more compelling read.
Master plans rarely survive contact with reality.
Exactly. Showing the cracks in the alliance proves the author understands how the world actually works.
Adding this nuance doesn't weaken the author's argument that Europe is using Ukraine as a buffer. Rather, it makes the argument bulletproof by showing the audience that the author has considered all angles and isn't just relying on sweeping generalism.
It transforms the piece from something that just tells the reader what to think into a framework that shows the reader how the hidden mechanics of the world are operating.
I love that, which perfectly sets up our wrap-up for today's critique. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground here.
We really have.
Let's concisely summarize the three main takeaways for the listener to implement. Number one, frame the transition between factual military history and speculative geopolitical theory to maintain credibility. Use those structural signposts or a two-act division.
Yep. And number two, invert the structure to open with the gripping Israel-Syria-Russia dynamic as the narrative hook. Don't bury it at the end. Use the stolen wheat anecdote or the K-meme-based geography to create immediate suspense.
And finally, number three, add nuance to the portrayal of Europe to reflect the complex realities of the alliance. Differentiate the Baltic states' existential panic from Western Europe's economic fears and acknowledge the survival agency of the Ukrainian.
It'll make the whole macro thesis so much stronger.
It really will. I want to sincerely thank the listener for submitting such a deeply researched and fascinating piece of material. The foundational knowledge here is incredibly strong, and we warmly invite you to implement these tweaks and submit your revised work back into the show for another critique.
Yeah, analyzing how these structural changes alter the reading experience is going to be fascinating. We really look forward to seeing the next iteration.
Because ultimately, a geopolitical puzzle this complex will never have a neat, linear picture on the box. But if you sequence the pieces with precision, acknowledge the friction between them, and guide the reader's eye to the right details, the underlying truth you reveal is going to be impossible to ignore.